when you're even listening to like Jab Jab, like the music, like there's this real like energized, charged up. When people are talking about mass, I feel like Grenada's, the oil mass is like emblematic and embodies all those things. And I'm like, how could I not experience this? Like, how could I be alive on this earth and not get to experience like what that is, what it means, what it stands for? All of the people born before me who have like made it possible for us to celebrate this way. Like when you see like the chains and the oil and like the horns, like that is so emblematic and embodies like a visual embodiment of like what it means to like persevere, what it means to like retain culture, to hold culture, to allow culture to persist in like the contemporary age that, you know, might not have the aesthetics of these other things that people are a little bit more familiar with, but very much is a reflection of like how our culture or Grenadian culture has like persisted in that time.
So I'm here today with Sharine Taylor. Hello. Sharine is an award-winning music and culture writer, essayist, critic, filmmaker, and an emerging production designer who shares narratives of people with Caribbean heritage. Some of your work has been shown in the New York Times, Teen Vogue, Adidas, and many more. Yeah. And you're now serving as the editorial director for Carnivalists, their like editorial segment, The Radar. So can you tell me a little bit about how you even got into this space of sharing work of people with Caribbean heritage?
Yeah. So in like 2015-ish, Justin Bieber would have dropped Sorry by this time. And a lot of the editorial coverage that I was reading, because I was like really into music journalism. I think I had started writing 3 years prior. And a lot of the coverage that I was seeing was just like, Justin Bieber is bringing back dancehall. And I was like, what is going on here? Retrospectively, like dancehall to me had never left. And like retrospectively, being somebody who lives in Toronto, like it never leaves a place. But I still think that like even in those like really big diasporic cities like New York, Miami, Toronto, London, arguably LA, like I don't think dancehall leaves, right? Whether it becomes something that's like becomes like part of the mainstream pop and within mainstream pop's purview, that's one thing, but it definitely would not have been through Justin Bieber. Right at the time, there was like an opening at, I was so furious and filled with rage. And I was like, I need to do something about this. So I made this pitch to Noisy Canada, which is like Vice's music arm. And they had an office in Canada at the time, or in Toronto. And I was like, I have to write about this. So I wrote this like long essay, just like critiquing everything that I had seen. And then, it was published. There was like really good reception. And then like a few months later, they had an editorial music like internship, and I applied and I got it. And that's kind of like where it all began. I just started like writing. It was this new medium that I loved. I felt that I could like be in conversation with what was happening around me, but also speak largely to like a diasporic way of understanding how Caribbean people appear or are understood within the larger pop culture.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we were chatting about a little bit before, where I said like being, born in Canada, but having those roots back home, wherever back home is, it's kind of like understanding that a lot of us share that identity of, yes, we're here in the diaspora, but we feel such strong connections to home, right? So how would you say your connection to your home, Jamaica, has informed your work?
Yeah. Like one of the benefits of living in Toronto is that home is not very far away. Like it's very much a privilege that if I wanted a certain produce or an item, I can go to a store, like a grocery store, and probably find it. And if not, there are like special stores or neighborhoods that I can go to find it. Like I don't take that for granted at all. And I think that is like something that I know and I understand and like hold as a privilege. And also like being able to go to Jamaica is also not an expensive endeavor, like in comparison to other places. Like I can just hop on a flight, give or take $500 or less, and I can 4 hours away and then I'm there, And I think that having that kind of accessibility has certainly helped in maintaining those connections. Also, because those products are here and because it's so accessible, that is all thanks to the people that are here. Like, there's no part of my life where I didn't do something or didn't engage in something that didn't reaffirm my connection to my Jamaican identity. All my friends at every stage of my life were like West Indian, and if not, they were like West African. And like, I don't know, just even having access to like even being in proximity with like other like West Indian people, like yes, Jamaican people, but like Trinidadian people, Guyanese people, like Grenadian people, St. Vincent people. Like I have like a very distinct memory of like going to church and when I was younger. And one of the reasons why I really like church is because when I was younger, I just thought like the world was like Jamaica and Canada. And then I was going to church and I was meeting these people and they were like, I'm from Grenada, I'm from St. Vincent, I'm from Guyana, I'm from Trinidad. And like, it was coloring my understanding of the Caribbean and the people in it. Like that is a privilege as well, right? So the short and concise answer is that like just being able to access people, what they bring, their cultures, their traditions, and being socialized in an environment where I can like learn more about that identity is something that's really helped me stay connected. And then as I got older, being able to frequently visit Jamaica, getting to know people there, building community there, that has been like a really critical element to it as well.
A lot of the work that I see that you're doing or that I've seen you do is around carnival. Mm-hmm. So I believe it was last year, maybe the year before, you did a piece with Adidas. Mm-hmm. So was that something that you wrote, or just tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the campaign that Adidas did was spearheaded by a Toronto-based production company called Peak. And the director that Peak employed to execute that campaign was someone by the name of O'Shane Howard, who's just like an incredible director, incredible like photographer. And he was like, yo, I'm doing this project and I really, really want you to come on board as the copywriter. We're doing 3 digital spots. And he gave me the whole rundown of what the campaign would be. And I just thought that was such a cool thing to be like asked to do. Like never in my mind, nowhere on my bingo life check, like bingo card for life that I have like being able to like do copywriting for Adidas for this like very hyper local thing. Like we weren't just talking about Carnival. We were specifically talking about Caravana. I just thought that was like the coolest thing ever. And like, to be invited to that, I'm eternally grateful. Thank you, O'Shane and Peak. But like, I think that that's just like a really cool thing to have been part of and just kind of get to see it like actualized. Like that was really awesome as well.
So I remember watching a little bit, like the clip that you posted on Instagram, but for the people who maybe didn't see it, like tell me a little bit about the story that you told in your copy.
Yeah. So there was 3 spots. The first one was there were these 3 people. One of them was supposed to be like a newbie to Carnival. The other one was supposed to be someone who had some experience. And the other one was supposed to be this veteran. And they were kind of meeting up and getting ready to play mass together. The pieces that they wore were by this designer from here, also really awesome, named Natalia Amras. So like it was a mix of like the Adidas stuff and like how she'd repurposed them. The second one was speaking with a designer to kind of like figure out like how design can be a part of storytelling in the Caribbean. So like I created the questions, those folks offered their answers. So I believe the second interview was with Denise Chang Kit, who designs for, it's coming to me, not the Revelers, the band. Nations, yes. So who designs for Carnival Nations. And then they had the 2 band leaders, Marcus and Bryce, for the following. So yeah, my job was to come up with the questions, and then those answers or the responses is what you end up seeing in the clips.
Nice. Yeah. Very cool. I just thought it was amazing to see local people doing I just feel like, me personally, I just love seeing Toronto on the screen. I just love the way we talk. I love everything about us. I feel like there's no one like us. Right. I just love seeing us on screen and, having local people share our stories. So I see that you're doing work with Carnivalist. Can you tell me a little bit about what Carnivalist is?
Yeah. So like in 2019, or 2019 or 2018 would have been like right before the pandemic, an app came like floating across my timeline, and it was advertised as like, if you are somebody who is jumping for the first time, or you're just somebody who jumps and just needs like a place to plan everything, this is an app where you can do that. So you can like purchase tickets, you can purchase your costumes from the band, you can like have access to these guides that they were creating about like how to plan for Carnival. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. I tweeted about it. I was like, this is such a great app. I think if this was in 2018 or 2019 that tweet was made, would have been year 1 or 2 of me playing mass. So I had attended as a plainclothes person, and then I started like playing mass like in around 2017. I think that was my first time jumping. And I loved it so much. Like it's like I always say it's like my most expensive hobby. But like I loved it. And my cousin and I were like, she would call me, she'd be like, let's go here. And like within an hour I had this whole plan, but I was like going through all these blogs and all these like folks who would like kind of champion the culture and from their experiences and pulling all this stuff together. And I was like, man, it would be so great if there was like a centralized place for you to kind of get everything together. Earlier this year, I received a message from the founder of the app. His name is Jonathan Charles. He's like, yo, like, I really I remember you tweeted this thing like how many years ago? Like, would you like to come on board as the editorial director? And I was like, of course, absolutely. This is like, I feel like this job was made for me. And a lot of people, like, when I'm like reading the comments, when I shared it, they were like, we feel like this is made for you. Like, this is a job that was like tailored exactly to what you write about. And so my job at Carnivalist is there's like this educational component that's missing, right? So let's say somebody comes onto the app, they purchase a costume and they purchase a ticket. And now they have this costume and they have this ticket for this place that they're probably going to for the first time. And then there's this real educational aspect or this opportunity that we have, so that when people purchase those tickets and when people purchase those costumes, they can dive right into more information about the place they're going to. So for example, we recently published our guide to St. Vincent.
Mass.
Right. And we have this like really cool like map widget on the site. So you can like find a location and read all the articles that like belong to it. And so our ultimate guide series, which is something that happened or that was like kind of being done prior to my arrival, is like this kind of like no nonsense, like straight to the point thing, like the document on like how you can like prepare for Carnival. So these are the dates, these are the times, these are hotels that you can stay out, these are like this is what it's kind of like. And so now since I've been there, it's a little bit more standardized. So it's just like, this is the local currency.
Oh, nice.
This is like how you can pay, or like this place prefers cash. And if you are paying in cash, it's US dollars. We've linked out to like a real-time currency converter so people can like see, this is how you get around. These are the bands that are active for this year. These are their themes. This is what the parade route is like. This is what Juve is like if they have it. This is when Juve is held. So we're giving people like the same questions that me and my cousin asked when we're planning. We put this in this document, and it's like, it's so short and to the point. Like it only has the answers that you're asking. So it's like, we're trying to make that like the first thing that people look to when they're planning. And then what I've been brought on board to help enhance is like the cultural aspect of it. So when you're playing mass in like Grenada and people are for the first time seeing oil being incorporated into it, we have an explainer that says this is what that element of Grenada is. When you go to Jamaica for the first time and you're hearing dance hall and you're like, this is kind of weird, we have a little bit of context to say like, Carnival was something that was brought and imported into Jamaica in the 70s by Byron Lee. And Jamaica Carnival is unique because you're going to get a heavy dose of like Trinidad soca, but because it's Jamaica, you're also going to get that balance of dance hall as well, right? So really what our job is providing like hyper local information and cultural, like, you know, cultural information that helps people better understand the places that they intend to play mass in.
So where do you get this hyper local information from? Like, are you getting people who have been to these carnivals before, or people who reside there to give you the information, or where do you figure it out from?
Yeah. So for example, we published one for Caravana as well. The person who wrote it, which is AJ Morris, about a year or so prior to us commissioning her for this piece, she had published this really beautiful essay on Teen Vogue about how participating in Caravana helped her affirm her relationship with her body, right?
Oh, that's amazing.
So I was like, you know what? I think that you'd be a really great person to write our ultimate guide to Toronto Carnival. So she wrote that. And then, you know, there's the Becoming a Queen doc that has Joella in it. I know Joella's from St. Vincent. So I was like, would you like to write this piece on the ultimate guide to St. Vincent Carnival? She was like, yeah. So in commissioning those pieces, I'm doing what I hope is like good research to find people that have like real connections to that place and who live there or have like experiences there that can like invite their audiences into the fold and also invite our general audience into the fold so that you can be confident that the information that is provided to you is provided from like a real place of knowing and not just like some random person.
So you said carnival is your most expensive hobby.
Yeah.
What are some of the carnivals that you've been to?
So I've done Jamaica Carnival is like my go-to. Like it's easy for me to go and jump there because my family's there, so it takes away a lot of the accommodation costs. But Jamaica Carnival is like one I've done a few times. I've done Caravana. I did Barbados in 2018.
Nice.
This is my first year doing Grenada. I manifested this. This is like, I'm so excited. You don't understand.
It's amazing.
I am living and gagging a little bit. I'm so stoked. Like I feel like, you know, but like I've been like every year, if you go on Twitter, it's like tweet after tweet. I must find my way to Grenada. I will end up in Grenada. Nobody understands. I'm dying to go to Grenada. I need Grenada. It's finally happening. And then next year, fingers crossed, I'm supposed to be going to Trinidad. Fingers crossed. The Mecca. Right? I have this friend, Tennille. Tennille's an awesome like person, but like publicist. And she was saying to me, every year she texts me, she's like, Sharine, are you coming to Trinidad this year? Sharine, are you coming to Trinidad this year? And I always say, Tennille, I do not have the what's that meme? I do not have the capacity for that right now. I was like, I don't have the stamina. I need to do at least 3 or 4 carnivals before I make my way over to Trinidad because I don't want to embarrass myself. And then I don't want you to be chipping down the road and you see me at this like huffing and heaving because I can't keep up. I need to do at least 3 carnivals before I make my way over.
Just so you know, Spice Mass's pace.
It is?
Yes.
Okay.
Very much so.
Okay. I feel like I'm good. Like I've been going out, I've been doing my daily walks, you know, I've been trying to run a little bit, but make sure I can like keep up. And I feel like I'm good, but you know.
You're going to find out when you get there. Trust me.
Exactly.
Like sleep is not a thing carnival season. And I think that's the same no matter which island you go to. It's like, yo, this is carnival time. Right. This is time to play mass. Right. Like sleep nothing.
Exactly.
So it's so much fun. And so you're going to Spice Mass this year. Are you going to be doing like editorial work or?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's amazing.
Like for my own, I feel like even if I wasn't, like I feel like I couldn't not do something. The thing that I really appreciate specifically with Grenada, and as somebody who has just like observed how carnival is done there, is that I think that there's like a real sexiness to carnival in general. I get it. Like the costumes are beautiful. The way that they embrace your body or the way that they give you a medium to embrace your body. Like I love that aspect of it. And it's a very pretty thing to do. Like when you're playing Pretty Maslin, like when you see it, it's just like, it's a lovely thing to see. And I think that like generally, and as I started just understanding carnival more, when people see oil mass, there's a huge disconnect because it doesn't look like Pretty Mass, right? And I'm like, well, it's not supposed to. I don't even think those are its intentions. And when we're looking at the history, or at least the history that I've understood about carnival, and specifically as it relates to Grenada, there's like a real embracing and understanding of like resistance, and a real embracing and understanding of like turning everything over. Like I feel like that's so deeply entrenched in the lyrics, or just like, you know, this real antithetical thing to maybe the things that like, you know, are a little bit more commercially palatable. And then when you're even listening to like Jab Jab, like the music, like there's this real like energized, charged up, like when people are talking about mass and like when people are talking about like marching, like I feel like Grenada's like the oil mass is like emblematic and embodies all those things. And I'm like, how could I not experience this? Like, how could I be alive on this earth and not get to experience like what that is, what it means, what it stands for, all of the people born before me who have like made it possible for us to celebrate this way. Like when you see like the chains and the oil and like the oh my God, the horns, like I'm like, how is that like that is so emblematic of like, and embodies like a visual embodiment of like what it means to like persevere, what it means to like retain culture, to hold culture, to allow culture to persist in like the contemporary age that, you know, might not have the aesthetics of these other things that people are a little bit more familiar with, but like very much is a reflection of like how our culture or Grenadian culture has like persisted in that time.
I think one of the coolest things about the Jab or the Jab Nation, I was talking to my grandmother about it, and she's like, you know, like back in my days, the Jab thing wasn't even a big thing. There would be like one Jab coming down the road and all the kids would run away. They're scared. Right. It's a scary thing. It's supposed to be a scary thing, but you know, as it's evolved over time, we've embraced it. So now it's just land of the Jab. And when you're playing mass, honestly, it's such like I can't even experience when you I can't even explain. When you're going down the stretch Juve morning, you're gonna know exactly what I'm talking about. Like the drumming is very much like the heartbeat of the Jab. So when people are playing mass in the Jab sections, for the most part, they don't even have music. They just have their drums and they're just beating their drums and they're chanting, and it's amazing. It's actually so amazing to even think about, because being there and seeing it from a small age, I never really like looked at it from a critical lens and breaking it down that this means that means that, but it's just like actually getting older and having the understanding and still trying to relearn and understand like, okay, well, what does the horns means, or when they're chanting ule ule jab jab, like what does that mean? And I was thinking about that yesterday. Actually, I'm like, I know that there's a history of French colonialism in Grenada. And I'm like, ule, ule. I'm like, does that mean where the? I'm like going back to my grade 4 basic French. I'm like, does that mean where the jab jab? I'm like, I don't know what it means. But it's so many things that I've seen in Grenada in terms of spice mass and in terms of jab that I didn't understand. That I want to learn. And that's part of what I've been talking about as the face of the festival, is that we need to understand the meaning behind the mass and why we're doing this, so that we don't lose the culture and that it doesn't just become a commercialized or a sexy thing. It's like, no, this is our celebration of our emancipation, celebration of our victory, of our resistance. Carnival is often a lot of socio-political commentary, what's happening in society. We're going to talk about it. We're going to express it on the road on that day. Right. So I really, and that's even part of the reason why I started this podcast, to talk to people who are doing the work, right? Because we need to have an outlet or just a place for us to have these conversations so that it doesn't get lost. I feel like it's very easy for different aspects of our culture and different cultures to get lost when we don't know the meaning behind it. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I just wanted to have that whole spiel there.
Yeah, no, I agree. Also, like, you know, I've made it very, very clear. I'm like, I'm a Jamaican
to the bone.
I'm Jamaican, right? You feel me? And like, we have something that looks akin to like Junkanoo. I'm pretty sure we have Junkanoo.
Yeah, you guys call it Junkanoo, I believe. Yeah.
We don't have Carnival. I very much like regionally, like, sure, I'm Jamaican, but I very much consider myself a guest, like when I participate in these things. And like, I'm very happy and very privileged and very honored that like folks have accepted me where I'm able to, or have invited me to experience things. And like, just as like as a proper guest thing, like you come to someone's house, you take off your shoes, whatever their rules are, you live by them. I feel like it's critical that if you've made this decision that you're going to play mass somewhere, I think you owe it to yourself to figure out like, what am I doing? You know, like I love Pretty Mass so much. And I think that is the entry point for a lot of people. And then being on the road march and then doing the road march might be like the stop and the finishing, like the starting and stop. But I have to tell folks a lot of times, I'm like, the parade is typically the finale of a months-long celebration, right? And everything prior is going to look like monarchs. Everything prior is going to look like traditional characters. Everything prior is going to look like kiddie mass. Like, we cannot forget children's involvement in this, right? Everything else is going to look like some kind of like carnival arts, whether you're seeing like, you know, these traditional aspects or things that have now become part of the fold, like tuck bands and Barbados and things of that nature. I think it's important that we are understanding that oftentimes we're at the very end of what has been something that is probably a little bit longer. And that if you're able to, if you have the time to like read about like what is informing this and what might make playing mass in one country a little bit different than playing mass in another country. I think all of that is like really, really important to know and to understand and to embrace as somebody who is going to continue to endeavor on playing carnival or playing mass in carnival.
I think I completely agree with you. And I think it's actually incredibly empowering when you find out why certain characters exist, what the story is behind it. And for me, I've said this in a prior episode, but I'm second generation Canadian. So my parents were born here, but my grandmother is the one who kept me connected to Grenada. And I feel like I am constantly trying to relearn and reconnect the meaning of certain things in carnival and different things like that, because my parents, I'm pretty sure my parents don't know, because they never taught me. And that kind of scares me because I have a son and I want to be able to impart on him the real meaning and stuff like that. And so when you talk about, you know, kiddies and it being a really important part of carnival, I completely agree with you because they're the ones who we have to pass the torch to. And so when we pass them that torch, we have to give them the information on how to carry it in the best way. Yeah. Right.
Like, I remember, like, the most formative memories that I have as a child are always like scored by like reggae or scored by dancehall or like any like kind of like cultural thing that we did. Like those are my core memories, right? And I cannot imagine like not being taught those things. And I feel like, I can't imagine what my life would be like having not been taught those things. And to my point earlier, I feel like maybe if I wasn't directly taught those things, the way that I was socialized and like what I was exposed to, who I was exposed to growing up, I think I would have had some kind of other in. But yeah, like my friends' kids, my nieces and nephews, I'm always like, I'm the culture aunt. So like send me, like, if you want, like one of my friends' daughters, I was like we should like play mass. And so we went. That was like a really, really great experience. Or like, I'm always like buying books that are like, here, these are some books about like playing mass as children and stuff like that. Here's some books about Jamaica or like about wherever they're from. I'm like, just, you know, do what you gotta do with your kids. But I feel like that's like really a very important thing. Also, like, completely aside, but like, I think that like one of the coolest things that I've kind of like come to discover is that a lot of folks, who end up like designing or like just being really like part of like mass, they have like really deep history and knowledge of like pan. Like their parents like took them to like these pan competitions, or they were like pan players, and then they ended up, and I'm like, that's so cool that you get to be a part of like carnival in one capacity, or at least like, if not carnival, like a part of like this like very specific Caribbean / Trinidadian way of like learning this instrument. And then you bring it into like, you get to like develop your interest into like designing or being a part of mass. Like, I think that's so cool. And I think that like, I don't know, like, to your point, children are like the next generation. They're going to be who gets to develop this, who gets to like take it to the next level, who gets to continue these traditions. And I think that leaving them out of the conversation or not letting them see how their presence and their imagination directly contributes to carnival is like a huge loss. So that's why I'm always like, get the kids involved. Get
No,
the kids
yeah,
involved.
100%. And I like, I'm just scared, to be honest, that we're not going to be able to do this thing the way that it's supposed to be done. And that's why I'm like, well, what can I do to make sure that my part is done and I've made my contribution to try to help this thing be preserved, right? Because we've even seen, for example, in Grenada, we used to have a Creole. I'm sure some people still speak it, but for the most part, it's lost. So I think my grandmother's grandparents could speak it, but they wouldn't speak it to the kids. They use it as like a secret language against them. And I know one girl from when I went to high school, she's from Dominica. She said that like in her family or like culturally speaking in that Creole language was like rude. So like you're not allowed to speak it to elders or something. And I don't know where that comes from. I'm sure there's like history and where that comes from, but I don't want to see our language, our carnival culture get lost the same way that so many of our languages have been lost.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably a whole bunch of conversations that we can have about like exporting labor or like having labor done elsewhere, or like what the climate is on people who choose to design their costumes by hand or like have it done by any other means. And then also just like, you know, this is something that I've kind of maintained in other places. Like our culture is kind of like the thing that people get to know us more by. And then at times, sometimes people make these decisions where it's like less about like maintaining and more about like, I need to get a dollar, which is like, it sucks, but like, welcome to capitalism. And then I often wonder about those same things, right? Like part of my learning about Massmore is realizing that there are people who are coming from lineage of craftsmanship or craftspersonship in the Caribbean. Like there are people who know how to work with brass and put them into costumes. There are people who are shoemakers and know how to put them into costumes, wire benders, feather workers. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, like it could be a combination of a lot of things. Like one, are those people working with apprentices? 2, are there apprenticeships available? Like there's all these factors that determine those things. But then there's this other element of modernity that I want to like consider as well in order to like get things to evolve. So it's like finding whatever the fine line is and trying to like toe it so that you're making sure that you're making room for innovation while also preserving the things that are very, very important, which is a very, very difficult line to toe. And for a lot of countries, like if we're being really honest and candid, Carnival and Mass is a tourism product. Like it's no longer this hyper-local thing. It's something completely different, and that's a good thing. That's a bad thing. That's an entirely different podcast. But it might be something that we can pull the reins on where we can. And then if we're not, I wouldn't even say it's about like cutting our losses more than it is like, okay, what can we do individually to make sure that we are retaining this thing and preserving the things in the best way that we know how. There's like this carnival museum I saw from, I think like Trinidad. I'm not sure if it's a touring museum, but I do know that there is a carnival museum. I think like things like that are incredible, right?
Where is that museum?
I think it's somewhere in Trinidad.
Okay.
I don't know where, but maybe I can find a link and we can put it.
Yeah, no, but that was something that the band leader of Lavway Mass, Hayden, was saying. He was like, all these big king and queen costumes, they end up in the garbage.
Right.
He's like, that should be in a museum somewhere. And I completely agree. And I said this when I was speaking to David, who's a section leader with Crown Mass. And I was saying to him, at the Royal Ontario Museum, I remember going to like an Indigenous, I don't know if you would call it like an exhibit maybe. And they had the clothing items and the stories and the little baby shoes and all the intricate. Imagine having something like that for our carnival, or even carnivals from around the world. Like, this is something from Trinidad Carnival, or this is something from Toronto Caravan, and the first, you know what I mean? Like these little pieces of history. And I think it's important for us to remember that we are making history right now. Yeah. So how can we preserve this moment in time so that 20, 40, 50 years from now, someone can look back and say, wow, that's what it used to look like. That's what it used to be.
I would think like, and I hope I'm attributing this to the right person, but, you know, shout out to Dr. Julie Crooks at the AGO. When I went there for their fragments exhibition, which is like just incredible, in like the main walkway, there's this huge moko jumbi like right in the middle. And I'm like, oh my God, like I've never seen this before. Like I've never seen like us in an institution that way. And just to like have that as like literally as soon as you walk into the AGO and you figure out which direction you're going to, you just look up in this space and there's this huge moko jumbi installation there. It's so beautiful. And I was like, yeah, like same thing. Like this is like all of these costumes and all of these things are part of what should be preserved and what people should remember. I think in the fragments exhibition, there was like one or two like pieces, or it might have been like a triptych by an artist that was just like celebrating Toronto Caravana. And I'm just like, wow, like this should be like, this shouldn't be an isolated incident. Like this should be like our everyday.
Yes.
Like, you know, like this shouldn't be like, you know, from this date to this date, you can see this thing. It should be like, this is part of who we are. We have like really conflicted, but ties nonetheless to this land. And we've been very integral into, you know, what it is today. And I think that if there are ways that we can kind of honor those contributions, we should. And like how they materialize, like especially when it comes to something like Caravana, like we should figure out ways to make that like a everyday thing and not like a July to August thing.
So what are some of the ways that you would say you've been able to materialize your contributions? I know before you were talking about a film. I'm not sure how much you can say about it. But.
Yeah. So right now we have a film in development that is like really focused on like what the culture of Caravana is, and what it facilitates and the people that are in it. It's a narrative, so it's not like a documentary or anything, but the backdrop of that narrative is entirely dependent on kind of the energy that people have around like fêtes, around Juve, around mass and things of that nature, and like how I've experienced it here. I would say, and I'm biased, but I would say that like there's a great deal of consideration and thinking about like who is involved in the project, and the kind of story that it tells and the world that it aims to create on screen. Like that is, I think that is my most favorite part of it. And I'm really excited, like once we film and it wraps and it's like ready to be consumed, like I'm really excited to see how people take to it. But I think more importantly, one of the words that I've been trying to like use as a title is like documentarian. Like I really like am trying to understand my work and am writing accordingly as somebody, as like something that is timeless in the sense that like I really want to be able to capture a moment or a culture and how it moves through the words that I do, or whatever, like however, whatever media that comes out in, right? I really want people to understand that like this is a snapshot of like what was happening and like how I've understood it at this date. I think that that's like something that's very important to me. And also somebody who like thinks a lot about what my educational experience was like. Like I don't ever remember at any point in my time as a student learning prior to university, learning about like Caribbean people's lives, ways of living, tradition, culture in school. And like Black History Month was like, Black was like a catch-all, right? And it was like Martin Luther King. I'm like, these people, I am so grateful. Stuff. Yeah. But they don't got nothing, like they don't have as much to do with us. Not nothing, but like, and then when we did focus on like, on Black history, it wasn't encompassing of all the way that Black folks have like allowed Canada to be what it is or have afforded us. And I'm so grateful for what I've been taught in terms of, or rather, I'm grateful for the people that I've been taught about. But retrospectively, I'm like, okay, like there's something missing here a little bit. And it wasn't until I was like in university by fluke, I had an online class and I never went to anything like in person. I just went online and I would watch it like weeks later. And one day I was just on campus and I was like, I'm gonna go in class today. That week was like the week they were talking about Jamaican sound systems. When I tell you I showed up every single class after that in person. And like that was really like my entry point. And like, you know, I concurrently just things were happening at the top of the podcast. I was talking about how, I started writing, like that was like the following year. I started writing about Jamaica and then I was like, I need to learn more. I was visiting Jamaica and then in school, I was just introduced to a whole bunch of scholarship that I was just like, okay, I have this like pop culture knowledge and now I have this like academic knowledge that like backs it down. And that is a very long way of me saying that like part of how I see it materializing is like in the ways that I can, write about something or document something. I really want it to be meaningful and I want it to be like encompassing of like all of these experiences that I've had so that it's accessible to like whoever may come across it and like use it as a reference for something.
And I think you're doing a great job with that because I was
thanks.
doing some research and I saw that one of the pieces that you did, you highlighted, I believe it was a photographer who did work where they put, they made it very like Jamaican and you saw like the beads. And so can you talk a little bit about that piece that you did?
Yeah, this would have been for Complex, I think.
Yeah, I think it was a Complex article.
Okay, so the same person that I worked with to do the Adidas piece, O'Shane, messaged me and he was like, yo, like I feel like people don't always see Caribbean culture as editorial, like something that can be highly stylized. And like you know, we were just kind of like chopping it up, like what we had seen like in magazines and stuff like that. And a lot of those magazine the photography or the images and the media that kind of emerge from them, they're very much environmental portraits and environmental portraiture. And environmental portraiture is typically when you go into an area and there's not like lights, there's no backdrop or anything, but you kind of capture folks like in the space that they're in or in the spaces that are familiar to them, which is fine. Those are all beautiful and they're great. But I think given his background as somebody who is a commercial director and a commercial photographer, he was just talking about this desire to want to see more of that kind of work. And I think if I'm getting my time right, the Levi's commercial would have just came out around that time. So Levi's had done this spot in Jamaica about the jeans and stuff like that. It's such a beautiful commercial. But we were just having these discussions just about like how the Caribbean appears in these commercial campaigns. So what was driving that that editorial was like the desire to want to see us in these highly stylized, like very clearly highly stylized images and photographs without compromising like who we were. And I feel like that like the entire team that was a part of that, they executed that so beautifully. And so for the piece for Complex, we were discussing more about like that idea, but also like everybody who was involved for the most part is a first or second generation Caribbean person, right? So it's just like, how are we understanding our own identity? How are we executing that in these creative projects? What does diaspora portraiture look like when we are capturing people who are maybe first or second generation? What are we, what does that look like? And, you know, a year or two prior, I had published a piece with Maisonneuve talking about the same thing. So there's another Toronto photographer named Dorian Charlton who just like does incredible work. And her work had recently been displayed in the AGO through an exhibition called Out of Many. And at that time, I was reading a lot of scholarship about Black feminists and talking about how Black women appear in the archive, and like who is in charge of being the architect for that, right? And the archive that I'm referring to here is like when we were talking about like when like Black folks were enslaved, like always these descriptors Black women were either absent or just these like horrible recounting of like what had transpired. So I was reading a lot of Saidiya Hartman, and I was introduced to Jorian's work at the time, and I kept thinking about the fact that Jorian's work was kind of informed by these portraits or these photographs that she had received from her father in the 70s, that were like her family between New York, Toronto, and Jamaica. And like, you know, we always talk about how there's always that one uncle who's kind of posed up like this, or like, you know, someone looks like this, someone's foot is out like that and whatever. And all of these like gestures that nod to like who we are and stuff like that. And with her community and her friends, she kind of like tried to embody that in these portraits that she was taking. And I kept thinking like to myself, like, it's really interesting to be somebody of the diaspora because you're figuring out who you are just in general, like that's a task. And then you're very much trying to negotiate these identities like in this new space. And, you know, we can't be from there because we're too foreign, and we can't be from here because we're too from back there. Like all these diaspora woes, right? So we're doing all this stuff, but I think what comes out of it is like, you know, just standing in like who and what you are, and figuring out like new ways to create that, acknowledge and honor those places that you emerge from, and that in-betweenness. And
it's very much an in-betweenness, because it's like, well, I'm not really from here, but I don't feel so connected to this land, but when I go back home I feel so. And then it's like just trying to figure that out. That's something that I've discussed before too. It's just kind of like, well, who am I?
Yeah, I mean, like a part of like my own, just like who I am is like asking a lot of questions and doing a lot of interrogation. And I remember just at a very early age, like when I started learning about like the people that were indigenous to this land and just like all this stuff, I was just like, okay, so we have the folks that are indigenous to this land who are caretakers of the land that we owe a lot to. And then we have all like, you know, our parents are very like, when they talk about their journey here, they're talking about being very fortunate to come here, right? So that's like a real reality to like grapple with. But then a lot of the ways that they were able to come here are racialized and gendered. So like a lot of people who came to Toronto came here through the West Indian domestic scheme, which was like, we need people to do domestic labor. So if you come here, and they were like, they had a preference towards like women specifically from Barbados and Jamaica. They come here, they do domestic labor for a year, and then you have the chance, it's not even guaranteed, but you have the chance to apply for your family and send for your family to come here, right? So it's like negotiating indigenous people and what we owe them, like the plights that they have to navigate and still have to navigate, understanding our very like conflicted relationship with and to land here, and then trying to figure out yourself within the midst of that. Those are my worries and my concerns. And I'm just like always just trying to think of like what it means for me to be here. But I still think that even those kind of interrogations, even those kind of questions can allow you to think a little bit more deeply about like what your identity is and what your connection is to space, time, land, and all that stuff.
That makes me think of a conversation that I was having with my friend Brianna. Shout out to Brianna. One of the things that she was saying was like, our migration story is continuing through us. So it's kind of like understanding that, okay, we're here now, but we're still like, I don't know. I just always feel like I'm trying to figure it out. And I just realized that I have to accept the both and, right? So it's like, yes, I am both. My family is both from Grenada, but I am I'm Canadian, but then my great-grandfather he has native Guyanese. And for me, it's just like so much of the Caribbean that it's just hard for me to rep all of it. So I just say Grenada. Like that's because my grandmother used to always take me back. So that's where I feel the most connected to. Right.
And like, you know, man, I can't remember their last name, but their first name is Shanice. They're an educator. They're from here. I went to a screening of this film by Gyal by Ryan Prasadi. Shout out to Ryan. And Shanice they did like a post-screening panel, and Shanice was basically saying how Shanice is Trinidadian and indigenous. And they were saying that they went to a conference, and while they were at this conference, this person from Trinidad was introducing themselves, and they said like, apologies that I have the dialect of my colonizers. And they were kind of thrown off because they were like, what's going on here? And while this person was speaking, they were saying like, I am an indigenous person of like Trinidad. But when you know, things happen, when folks came over through the transatlantic slave trade, new identities were formed. Yeah. Right? Like, so when Shanice was talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I hadn't even began to reckon with what it means to be a Jamaican person in the diaspora. And that Jamaican identity is directly contingent to like the indigenous identities of the people of Jamaica. Now that's something that I'm thinking about as well, right? And I'm just like, oh, there's more.
There's so many levels to the identity. It's like, right. It's never ending.
Right. And I think those things are good things for us to think about, right? Like they're really important things for us to think about. And, you know, bringing it back to what we were talking about earlier, it's also good for us to think about when we've taken on these roles, either directly or indirectly, acknowledging or not acknowledging it as cultural ambassadors, to be mindful of what that means and to be mindful of what those responsibilities are and like who we are talking about when we invoke the word Grenadian, Jamaican, Trinidadian, this, that, whatever, right? Like those are all kind of part and parcel for the responsibility. And I'm really happy that I have people in my community that allow me to think that way and allow me to challenge my own thinking and challenge my own position and allow me to kind of take a step back and say, okay, cool. Like, let me reframe or let me think a little bit more deeply about something. I think that is like part of it as well, of like being somebody who cares about culture and being somebody who's like deeply invested in it is always just kind of like being willing to open up yourself to a new facet of things and growing within that.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that what you said is very important though. Like we actually have a huge responsibility as cultural ambassadors. And the one thing that I think for myself is like, I am learning as I go. I don't want anyone to think that like, I know this much or I know so much more than them. No, I just want to be a facilitator of a conversation and bring people on who have their specialized knowledge and to just have discussions, right? Because it's like there's so much more that we can learn together and through sharing of stories than we would be able to try to figure out like, oh, let me try to look this thing up online, but then this is conflicting with that. And I think that's one of like, I guess one of my own personal conflicts is when I'm trying to relearn and re-understand the roots of carnival and all these different things about just my identity and the character and the identity of carnival itself is figuring out, okay, but what's actually true? And how do I determine what information is valid and accurate as opposed to what is not? Because sometimes there's conflicting stories on like the origins of the jab and why they paint themselves in black or this horn, oh no, it's a devil thing. Like, and it's just kind of like, okay, but how do I know what's true? And I think that's something that's been the most difficult thing for me because we don't have so many records and oftentimes our records are just stories. And I just feel like that's really why I actually really appreciate Know Your Caribbean. Shout out to Know Your Caribbean on Instagram, because she's going and finding all of these archives and telling these stories and sharing documents and things that I would have never found on my own. And so I don't know. That's why I feel like with this podcast, I just want it to be almost like a capsule of history, even if in a small part, so that there's a record of something. And I feel like you're doing the same thing. Like you're making a record in real time of history and what's happening in the diaspora. No, but because I feel like oftentimes with this both and identity, it's like you're either going to get information about people who are local to the place, you know, back home or to here. And there's not so much storytelling of our stories of being both from both places, right? So that's my long spiel on that. But thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me. I feel like we could talk for hours. Maybe we'll have you come on another time again and we'll discuss more things. But where can people find you and where can they connect with you?
Yeah, I am annoyingly on Twitter and on Instagram at SHHARINE. And yeah, that's it. Sharine everywhere.
Nice. Thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for chatting me. If there's anything else that you want to say in wrapping up, let's chop that up now. But otherwise, thank you so much.
Yeah, people should do their research. Anytime you do something that is outside of like the things that you think you know or think you may know, just always do your research. It's like a click, read, a few Google searches away. So I always encourage folks just read where you can, learn where you can. There's like no downside to learning at all. Like it's always up from there. So make sure you do that.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you.